Recording in progress.
Good morning, everyone. I'm calling the Finance Administration Committee meeting for Tuesday, August 18th, 2026 to order. My name is Jim Spear. I'm the chair of this committee. The vice chair is Council Member Mike Gaudini. Council Member Mike Salmonson is absent today. And we have Borough Manager Dobbs with us. So let's talk about approving last month's minutes.
I will move to approve last month's.
Okay, I will second. So motions would be all you today, and so I'll do all the seconds. Okay. You like the minutes? All good?
Yeah, I don't think I was at that meeting.
Oh, that's right.
But as there's only two of us on the dais right now, I'm going to vote to. I'm going to assume that it reflects your recollection.
Trust me, they're fine. Okay.
Yeah.
All in favor of approving the minutes? That is 2-0. Thank you. All right, treasurer's report over to Ms. Dobbs.
Okay. So again, we're looking good for the year in terms of where we sit with our finances. I believe I've mentioned already that the bulk of all of our tax revenue is done being collected for the year. We'll have some trickling in through the last of the year, but otherwise that is more or less done. We are doing well with our real estate transfer taxes, and just taking a look at anything else that's kind of a little bit above and beyond. And then we're slightly above with our park rental fees. So this would be for like our facilities rental fees. So glad that folks are using our facilities for their events and activities. In terms of any of our expenditures, we did have a number of expenditures that came out of the capital in the past month. So we authorized a number of our larger ticket items. We put our down payment down for the elevator project, which is going to be under construction starting in December. So you won't see the full balance of that being expended until the work actually gets started. We did also, and you have before you today, authorization for the replacement police vehicle. That you won't actually see the cost of until that vehicle is delivered. So that's been ordered, but you won't see that come up on the capital. But otherwise, what we did purchase was the leaf box, and why am I blanking on the other one? But some of the capital expenditures that we've approved. So you'll see those in here as well. Otherwise, nothing really of note. We are taking a look at possibly creating a new line item for some of our police services. So in terms of the services that we provide that we would invoice for, and the services that we get from other neighboring municipalities in the sheriff's office, that would be something that we can discuss for the budget process next year if you wanted to pull that out as a separate line item, just so that we're classifying that more clearly. Those are more just discussions that we've been having. But right now, those just show up in miscellaneous revenue, so you won't see them necessarily itemized out. But otherwise, I'm happy to take any questions if you have any on the treasurer's report.
Questions?
Nope.
We don't have any questions.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Let's move on to recommendation items.
Okay, move to recommend scheduled bills for the general capital sewer and solid waste funds.
Second.
If I may, quick just caveat this. That one is left general for the July. I also want to note that we have, as part of this approval, corrected June schedule of bills that is in your packet. So just to briefly explain what happened here, when we pulled the schedule of bills for June, we only, for the general fund, only pulled, instead of doing a 1 month, it ended up being a 1 day of the bills. So the June schedule of bills did not actually capture the full bills list for the month of June. So as part of the schedule of bills, we have our regular July bills, which are correct, and then we have our corrected June bills to look at.
Okay. So how do we approve these? Do they have specific amounts attached to each of them?
Yeah, so let me share with you briefly what those are. And I have this broken down in our council business meeting. These are broken out. But I was not able to amend the agenda. This was discovered yesterday, so we did not have time to amend the agenda. But since it was left just for the schedule of bills, I just want to clarify that this is in fact doing two separate schedule of bills, and then the business meeting will have separate line items for each of these. So the
Yeah, I see that. The corrected one on the business packet schedule says the corrected June is $441,839.06.
correct,
That's all right?
yes. Mhm.
And then this one just says scheduled bills. I'm assuming that means for July, $953,165.65.
That's correct, yes. Yeah, so the original June schedule of bills, like I said, because it captured the full month for the capital, the sewer, and the solid waste, but it didn't capture the full month of bills for the general fund, so it was short.
Short like 80, 90,000, looks like.
It was about 100.
Yeah, sounds right.
So whatever we approved last month for June was short, so we're just correcting that this month.
Okay.
Sorry, hold on a second here. So is there a separate list of checks then for?
No, we just pulled it for the month. So what you would, if you wanted to do a compare and contrast, you'd have to take a look at the packet. Last month's council packet would show what was pulled for the June invoices, or for the June invoices. Which again, because it didn't include the full month, so we're missing things like our health insurance invoices, some of our utility bills. So some of them were routine, some of them were, the one-offs. I can assure you that there wasn't anything kind of too crazy in there. You can see obviously, again, because we had a lot of those capital expenditures this month, our schedule of bills for July is double that what was for June, and that's just because some of it is related as well to those costs incurred for storm cleanup. So we did have a substantial kind of unexpected expenditures for the cleanup, and the police department had some water damage from that microburst. We had all the tree cleanup costs as well. So some of those that you'll see in the schedule of bills for July relate to cleanup efforts there.
So let me just make sure I understand. So page 34 of the packet, which starts a list for June 4th through July 3rd. These are the additional items, or these are the combined, or the total corrected?
Total corrected.
So, where do these end?
Should be 8 pages for the
Yeah.
general.
So the total on page 42, oh,
Yeah.
that's just for that page, okay. So there's
So
no,
the-
there's no,
So the total,
Totaled.
yeah, so the total amount just for the general fund for June, the full total that should be
Yeah.
correct is the $211,893.84. If we go back to the packet that we had generated in July, our schedule of bills just for the general fund only totaled $113,922.06. So it's about a difference of $100,000. And again, the main difference between the two is that the one that we previously authorized in July, because it didn't capture the full month, was missing a number of our utility bills and regular health insurance bills. Yeah. And then the only other thing that I wanted to point out in our July schedule of bills is we had an invoice that was sent to, and our building code official didn't show up on our original June schedule of bills, so that's another larger cost. So if you look at our July schedule of bills, we did have an invoice that we sent, so we cut a check in June to our BCO consultant. That check was lost in the mail. We put a stop order on it. we voided it out, and we reissued it. So you'll see it pop up a couple times in the schedule of bills, but from an accounting perspective, it has been voided. We're not paying them 3 times, but it just shows up because there was the original check, and then we had to do the consulting or the accounting exercise to allow for that.
Yeah.
Could you point that out to me?
That one, sure. That one's going to be in this current packet in the July. So that will be on page. Oh, that's still June. We go to July. July, here we go. So that's going to be on page 30 of your packet.
Oh, I see, reissue. Okay, all right. Okay. Seem all right?
Yep.
Okay, all right. So how do we motion these into approval?
So if you just want to verbalize, so it would be, so we have, the motion was for the schedule of bills, so if you just want to
Yeah.
clarify the July and then the corrected June.
Yeah, motion to recommend approval of the corrected June schedule of bills totaling $441,839.06, and to recommend the July schedule of bills totaling $953,165.65.
Okay, seconded
Yeah.
on those. All right, should we just approve them then? All in favor of
Yeah.
approving those is 2-0, thank you. Okay, item B, boards and commissions appointment. We've received an application for the vacancy, on Environmental Advisory Council. I did send this on to the EAC chair and vice chair. I have not heard anything back from them. But it seems like this person is pretty qualified.
Yeah.
But I don't know what other applications or intended applications for EAC might be out there. So if I can hear back from the EAC.
Yeah. I think, I know that the EAC has appreciated having input prior to council actions, that we have the benefit of their advice in the past, and I would assume that they would want this for this. I thought that this person's application materials were solid for this type of board or commission. But kind of would also want to be cognizant of, if the EAC wants the opportunity to provide some input,
Yes.
providing that to them.
Yes, I would like that. I see this person's also interested in library board, so.
Yeah, I think their background and skill set seems very
Yeah.
calibrated for EAC.
Uh-huh.
But it sounds like probably maybe we've made some positive comment about this person's credentials. So, if this person's listening afterwards, it's not we're...
Thank you for applying.
Yes. I think I'm positively predisposed towards this application given what I have right now, and we just want to provide the EAC the chance to provide commentary to council if they have any thoughts.
That's right.
Does that sound correct?
Yeah.
So do we need to take a motion to take no action, or how would you like to, do we need to take a motion to table to the next meeting, or?
Yeah, so you're not recommending to not appoint this person, you're just choosing to not make an appointment at this time, given that you're seeking feedback from the EAC to discuss further. So we could just table this for a future.
Okay, or it could just get bumped to the business meeting.
If you hear,
Right.
if you hear from the EAC before Thursday,
Mhm.
this is an agenda item on Thursday's meeting as well. So we have it there if you are able to hear back and would like to make a recommendation and discuss during the business meeting, that is perfectly acceptable. You can then take action at that time. So if you're just choosing to table it from the F&A meeting, then I would recommend tabling it for
Okay.
now.
Okay.
Okay.
And then we'll have the opportunity to try to seek, you'll follow up with the EAC folks before
Yes.
Thursday and see if they have any commentary?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll do that, then I'll make a motion to table from this meeting, but with the intent that the item will, go forward to council.
Yep.
So we can take action if there's EAC feedback at that point.
I'll second that. And all in favor of that? Okay, 2-0, we're in favor of that, of tabling this.
Jim, I'm sorry to interrupt. I know you have your backup, but we just got kicked off of Zoom. If you want to wait for just a second.
This happens all the time now, is it?
Yeah, I'm working on this.
Oh, no, that's not your fault. Is it, are you hardwired into the?
Yeah, we're even hardwired into the internet.
Well, was anybody watching?
No,
We could just continue the meeting in the back, honestly.
that's fine.
Okay. All right, moving on.
Would you want to give it a second just to try to,
Okay.
if we
It's-
can?
It's trying to reconnect. There we go.
Recording in progress.
And we're back. Item C, Resolution 2026-13. Motion, please.
Move to recommend approval of Resolution 2026-13, the revised land development for 102 North Essex.
Yes. Second.
Okay.
So this is just a amendment of his previously approved plan, which is to subdivide one of the apartments into 2.
That's correct, right?
Okay.
And again, I apologize for the fact you do not actually have in your packet the most up-to-date resolution. Our solicitor did take a look at that and provided a slightly revised resolution. I will say, though, this does not change at all what is in that resolution. It just cleans it up to acknowledge that this supersedes the original resolution. So Resolution 2026-12 is the resolution that council adopted to approve the land development plan. Resolution 2026-13, which is what you have before you, and we have the revised in the council packet. I did update that this morning, but I didn't get a chance to update it for the F&A packet, so I apologize for that. We had a bridge meeting all morning, so the effect is still the same. So all he's doing is changing interior layout. This does not impact the design of the building, doesn't impact the footprint of the building, and does not impact any site design that he had in his original approved land development. What he's doing is he's taking the largest apartment, which was a 1,600 square foot apartment, and breaking that into 2 800 square foot apartments, bringing the total dwelling unit count from 4 to 5. Really, the only thing that impacts is the amount of contributions towards our open space fee in lieu. So you do see that reflected in the resolution, that that fee in lieu then has been increased accordingly to represent the 5 units as opposed to the 4 units. All of the other conditions of approval that were previously approved, all of the other waivers that were previously authorized, those all stay.
It also changes the bicycle parking.
So the bicycle parking and the vehicle parking were evaluated based on the unit count. What they actually have, just because of the change, because bicycles are based on the number of bedrooms, and the number of bedrooms is actually decreasing. So the 1 unit was a 3-bedroom, and now it's being dropped to 2 1-bedroom apartments, so it actually decreases. But as we understand it, there's no change to the required parking, so the applicant will not be reducing the amount of parking that's being provided. It will stay the same, which actually exceeds now the zoning requirements based on that bedroom count that is being changed because of this modification. So they still meet.
So they're providing more bicycle parking than they're otherwise required to provide.
Correct.
Yeah. No. Yeah, and this seems pretty basic. I was kind of like wondering why this wasn't done in the first place. So, yeah, it seems pretty straightforward.
Yep. Okay.
And all of that's the only substantive difference.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so what's going to happen is the applicant is still required to provide us with final land development plans that would satisfy the engineer's outstanding review comments. So what we'll see then, because what we received was just interior architectural drawings showing the change, the final land development plans that we will review prior to final approval and recording of the plan will then show all of those other calculations on the plan set. So we did review the parking, bike and vehicle parking, but those weren't shown on the plans that we were given, so that will all get updated in the revised plan set that they'll provide to us. And this is a very common thing where the actual final land development plan that council approves is still going to be revised one last time to adhere to all of those outstanding engineer review comments. So that gets reviewed internally by staff and consultants. Once that is authorized, then it goes to recording, and then they're permitted to get their permits to then do whatever sort of demolition and construction work that they'll need to do as part of the land development.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, makes
Okay.
sense.
All right. Well, all in favor of that? It's 2-0. Thank you.
Move to recommend authorization to advertise ordinance 1073 fitness and indoor recreation uses as recommended by the Planning Commission.
Second. Okay. So we were hoping to have a planning commission member in today. None of them is available, sadly. Tried every last one of them who was at at this month's meeting. However, I did talk to Jennifer on the
Yes.
phone, and you did too.
I talked with Jennifer because I realized no one was going to be able to make this.
Yeah.
She did say that she might be able to be available at the council meeting,
Yeah.
so that we have folks there that can also speak to their recommendations if
Yeah.
council members have questions.
Yeah. I think that might be a good idea.
Yeah, but it was good. I appreciated being able to talk it over with her and get a sense of what the discussion was like. I watched a little bit of the meeting.
Yeah, I watched the meeting too. They really did go back and forth on a lot of these things and considering different things that might happen. I think the two decision points that we have the two major ones are the dispersion thing, if we're still calling it that, and also the first 12 feet of retail along Haverford Ave
Yeah.
requirement.
And my understanding as well, and I don't know if there's like an update on this. So the dispersion ordinance came through when I was on planning commission. And I had kind of concerns about it at the time, and then in discussions on planning commission, we troubleshot a lot of that by specifying that, like would trigger against like. So like hair salons would trigger against hair salons, but hair salons wouldn't trigger against some other.
Like a nail salon.
Yes, exactly. And that was my understanding of how we wrote that, but I know but Jen had mentioned that at the meeting there was confusion over that and it wasn't clear, and then I think there was an interpretation that wasn't maybe not how it's being enforced, and so the only reason I bring that up in relation to this was Jen had indicated, if I'm recalling correctly, that like their recommendation on relieving the dispersion ordinance was also somewhat born from confusion over how the dispersion ordinance was being applied.
Yeah.
So like, I do want to make sure that we revisit that and ensure that like our policies related to the dispersion ordinance are straightened out. I don't know whether that has to be done through a code amendment or whether the language is just unclear, needs to be cleared up or wherever that lies. But that's I think some of the background to the first bullet point of this.
Well, at the planning meeting, I saw Kevin's comments and concerns about his role in enforcing had to do with, because these subcategories weren't spelled out anywhere in a chart, there was really nothing to reference when, the triggering enforcement you're talking about
Yeah.
steps in. And it seems like there's almost an infinite number of possibilities
Yeah.
for what what is it? Is it personal care?
Personal care.
Yeah.
Personal care, yeah, of the kind of elements they can have and compete against each other.
Yeah, which is a totally reasonable
Yeah.
concern to have. So if if at some point planning commission needs to recommend, like, here's guidance for that, then we can handle that. And then I guess, right, related to fitness uses, if we're breaking that out into its own use, it is now its own use. So if we wanted to, we could apply that. We also don't have to. if we
Yeah,
want to.
but even under fitness use, there could be a number of subcategories
That's
as
right.
well.
Right, the
A
yoga
dance
studio is
studio,
different
yeah.
from,
A dance or a
yeah.
whatever, yeah.
So, and I think that's my sense was that sort of like confusion was why they said, okay, well, don't apply this to this right now.
They also made a good point that the market might regulate a lot of this on their own too, like
Right.
whereas our town has a lot of dry cleaners, it's true, we're not likely to have a lot of gyms next to each other.
Well, so I think more so the concern was, and this is why I think like the second piece of the recommendation is actually very important, right? Which was, their concern was, some gyms are large, some spaces might be smaller, but if you have a large, it's not like we have a lot of like active corridor space where if one large gym goes in, it's fine because you have a huge corridor, right? We've got like a relatively like delineated Haverford Avenue and then to a certain extent North Narberth, right? That's our current activated corridor space. And so if a large kind of like width gym comes in, I think what I heard was there was concern that even though there might be activity inside, it may not be activating the street front in the way that like seeing actual activity, having a sense of activity occurring inside a given space would. And that was, I think, some of the thought process that had informed our current, use regulations on that street. And I think that informed their kind of compromise proposal for, the after 20 feet triggering an active frontage requirement. So that if you had a smaller space and it's 20 feet or less on the fronting part, right? Then you don't even have to deal with the active space requirement. Or if you have an L shape, right, where it's 20 feet, it goes back and then it opens up behind another thing, you don't have to deal with that. But I think it was just, my understanding was that the intent was there to be a backstop against just having an entire larger space that might be multiple storefronts today becoming just one large gym space.
Right, that was definitely planning commission's, their concern is that uses that front the street that are right up against the sidewalk are active uses and they're complementary to the other businesses. You can have people stopping by for something here and shopping there.
Yeah.
I looked at the map of Haverford Avenue. I think there are probably maybe 2 existing storefronts that are 20 or under 20 feet across.
Yeah, I think that they had picked something that they thought roughly approximated.
Yeah.
It might be off, based off of whatever
Yeah.
they were. I mean, I'm sure that they weren't out there with like the measuring tape looking at it.
Yeah. So I think my concern prior to watching the meeting and prior to talking to Jennifer, I think with other council members, had been that there are vacancies there now and we should liberalize as much as possible, so, you know, that pretty much anything that wants to move in, you're welcome to it, kind of philosophy. But I can see planning commission is kind of hedging against that, you know, we really want to be more careful about what we want on the sidewalk. I think that's probably, you know, that's probably the tilt point on this, you know, from.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think that like the problem set of Haverford Avenue, like I think that past council decisions have had an impact on the vacancies there. And the vacancies there, I think, are somewhat of a different problem set from, say, vacancies on like Montgomery Avenue, something like that, right? At this point, like, I think the problem set of that specific portion of Haverford Avenue is a couple steps beyond what it takes to get a tenant into an existing space, right? Because those properties have now like deteriorated for several years. Someone's gonna have to pay for fit out of space, and like, even if you're not coming in to like do a whole like reno, someone's gonna have to pay to do some sort of fit out, right? You've got an existing grocery store use of a large footprint.
Yeah.
Unless another grocer's coming in, someone's gonna be paying to do X, Y, or Z to that.
Yeah.
I suspect that those costs are expected to be passed on to the tenants that are coming into the space.
Right, so you think regardless of who's coming in, there's gonna have to be some major restructuring on the inside.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe the answer is to say like, oh, like, you know, just let them kind of figure it out, and that might be the right answer. I think that planning commission's right to try to have an eye on like seeking to ensure that we have activated uses in those spaces.
It's true, when we have this many vacancies, particularly all against each other, you know, that will probably require some kind of reconfiguration or rebuild or, you know, or gutting of the interiors. That's a lot of opportunity for things that might be less than desirable. You know, like a big business that is not an activated retail establishment that takes up a lot of street space, you know, that's more like a membership, like a gym membership place, that, you know, the possibility presents itself. So I think that's probably what Planning Commission wants to guide us away from.
Sure. I mean, I guess like the thought experiment, right, that answers the question is, let's assume that someone came in and, just for argument's sake, let's assume someone came in and rented American Family Market and one or two of the other spaces on either side of it, knocked out the walls and made it one large gym.
Yeah.
So if we're like comfortable with that as a theoretical thing, right, for Haverford Avenue, then that maybe like answers the question. You know, I guess like the way I kind of approach this a little bit is like, it feels like what we should be doing with Haverford Avenue is not necessarily being immediately reactive to saying, oh, well, I don't think we're going to be able to get these other uses, so let's just kind of roll with this because it's here. It feels like we should be doing some sort of more proactive planning for Haverford Avenue that is cognizant of the actual like problem set of like where do we want to get and how do we economically, financially get there.
Yeah.
And that's a much like larger problem set, so maybe it's totally legitimate to say, well, in the interim, let's just go and try to get something in that space. That's a totally legitimate position to be in. I just kind of feel like we've been kind of like backed into a position a little bit of saying like, well, you know, shouldn't we just kind of like figure out how to fill these spaces? And I think planning commission is reasonably raising a like,
Yeah.
you know, there's a rhythm to a street. And we've
Sure.
lost that right now because there's no activities in those spaces.
Yeah. So the recommendation on the dispersion is to not have dispersion
Right.
on these uses, but to introduce the uses nonetheless, so that's still kind of, providing for a new use. And also to have this 12-foot, on properties that are wider than 20 feet. So do we need to produce a recommendation here, like whether we like it or not, the planning commissions, or what? I mean, it's only two of us talking here, Mike may feel differently, he's not here.
Well, two of us, if we both agree, that would have been a majority whether Mike was here or not.
Yeah, still, I mean, I would like to hear from people who really feel strongly against it. I'm sure we'll, if someone does at the business meeting, we can hear from them there. But what, like, what's our role here to say we approve of the planning commission's recommendations, or that we recommend them for adoption?
Yeah, so what you have before you is a draft amendment. And this should be, what's this? This is out of order. I'm trying to find where it is in the packet. So the amendment itself, oh goodness, okay. Did you see the amendment is in, the amendment is in,
I thought it was in the, well,
it's in the council packet.
Mhm.
I'm realizing we definitely dropped the ball with your F and A packet today, I'm sorry.
That's what I got that.
It's in the council packet. So sorry, let's just pull that up real fast.
and while we're pulling that up, right, I think the specified like depth for how much the activated use would have to be if you trip into that is I think 12 feet. Is that
That's
right?
what they're saying, yeah, 12 feet.
So like the depths of those buildings,
About
I think
40.
that well, it depends. Some of them look like
40-ish.
they're about 40-ish, and then some of them look like they're about 60. So
Okay.
call it between
Mhm.
a quarter to a third
Mhm.
of the building depth would
Yeah.
have to be that.
Yeah.
So, 3/4 or 2/3
Mhm.
could
Mhm.
still be fitness space. You would enter in off of Haverford.
Right.
If you did like an L-shaped kind of thing.
And Jennifer made the point that you could combine a couple of properties in the back too and have a substantial.
Well, I think they've already been combined, right? Like, we did a reverse subdivision, we did a consolidation of lots back when this thing was approved as a development, and the consolidation of lots, I assume, still stands until someone comes in and re-subdivides that.
Well, here's the thing, it's never been recorded. The
What?
land development, the land development has not been recorded.
Okay.
So it has not actually been formalized at the county level. So the land development is approved. So conceptually, the lot lines follow what the approval has been. However, the land development itself has never been recorded, meaning that subdivision doesn't yet legally exist.
Okay.
So the lot lines, the pre-existing lot lines remain in effect that were there prior to the approval of the land development.
Meaning it's mostly one big property.
No, meaning that it's individual properties.
Meaning that there's
In
still
effect today.
multiple properties in effect today. So
Some of them are combined, but some of them aren't.
right, so let's just pull it up and see what we're working with here. So we have, so I believe what had been the American Family Market, this is part of, okay, that's Station Circle. So I believe what had been American Family Market is its own parcel. And then there is a chunk, so if you look at the county property records, and we don't have anybody online, but anybody who's online can take a look at this, but this is,
Yeah.
so there's this larger parcel right here.
Mhm.
That constitutes the majority of those storefronts, but not all of them.
Yeah.
And some of these belong to
Someone else.
the MAPES
Mm-hmm.
redevelopment, so this is where we have, so this is where, so this is Station Circle right here. So that's the Meta Technical is the
Mhm.
first one in, and then it's the hair salon, I believe, and then Phology, and then I believe American Family Market. And then there's this grouping of buildings here, which is aggregated as one parcel.
Yeah.
So there's multiple tenant divisions within this one building, one parcel.
Yeah.
And then there's the driveway entrance into the parking lot. And then this is the,
Yeah.
Swan, the Swan
Get-
Dance
oh,
Studio.
yeah.
This, or this is, sorry, hold on, let me orient myself
Yeah,
here.
there's Swan, and the other side of the drive is Get Cafe.
And so I think really what we would be talking about is the stuff to the west of the driveway is the likeliest
Mhm.
spot
Yeah.
for the thing that like would be a
Tax
lot.
collector's downstairs in the office
Thank you.
today.
Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
Because presumably, who knows, right? But presumably if something went into like the corner building, it's small enough that it would probably be a yoga studio or
Mhm.
something. There's not like a wide, width fitness use. Who knows, right? Because it could be anything. But I think that like the concern about having like activated space is really more so related to the larger assemblage. But if we're looking at this, like the one, where is that? Let's back up again. So American Family Market is, I think, to the west, to the pedestrian passageway through. Pull this up. Second time. Yeah, so basically, if you pull that back up again, it's American Family Market is one standalone thing. The larger property that's between the pedestrian pathway and the driveway entrance is the stuff to the east of American Family Market.
Yeah.
So it's that entire run of building.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it's everything, so where Swan used to be,
Yeah.
inclusive of, again, all of these are the former, right? So we had Swan, then we had, I think it was Village Treats was next to it, and then there was, what was here before? So if we go back, there was the custom framing, And then we had
McShay's.
this Johnny Max,
Mhm.
and then McShay's, and then the Easy Phone Repair, and then the old photography studio, which is now Get Cafe.
Yeah.
I believe was everything. And then one of these is separated. It might actually be the Get Cafe is separated out. And then you have the corner building, so the blue building on the corner, which was Revivals, still is Revivals. Or that's where Swan went to.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a standalone.
And it looks like a number of these spots, I don't know what the internal configuration of these buildings are, but a number of these spots have rear entrances as well. Not all of them, I don't
Mhm.
think. And again, maybe those rear entrances don't enter in a way that makes it easy to retrofit that as an entry to a kind of like rear fitness space with fronting access as well.
Okay, so we were talking about the possibility that the properties could be combined in the back to make a theoretical fitness studio space. And the problem was that the new lot lines hadn't been recorded, or they hadn't been, okay. But they still could be, right, if that ever became a,
Yes.
Well, but so it isn't though, right? Because if you look at that, those are all one parcel
yeah,
in Montgomery County records right now.
yeah,
Now that one parcel has not been combined with the other parcels around it, but like that run of buildings is currently one parcel. Here, this is,
right, yeah,
that's what Maggie had just pulled up.
Mhm.
So that entire thing is currently still one parcel.
yeah. Right, okay.
So I think in either scenario, whether they record that or they don't record that, I mean, it would be different, right, if you're trying to do American Family Market. That's on a different parcel, right?
So, I'm sorry, whose issue is it? If someone wants to combine properties there to make a larger space or reconfigured space, is that our problem right now? We have to do something to make that, to facilitate that? Or is it just purely like a process that has to take place that the developer would hopefully try to push along when it becomes relevant?
Well, I mean, it would be their responsibility to do it, but this currently is one parcel. So like that run assemblage is currently one parcel. And then they can record that and turn that into a mega parcel
Yeah.
that has like that plus everything around it.
Yeah,
You know, like, right, if this was a new development, then I guess like technically the parking would be quote unquote off-site because it's not on the same parcel. But I'm gonna assume that they have a grandfathered right to their current level of parking entitlements, so that probably wouldn't
right.
be
And
some
they
sort
have
of
their
a change of use issue.
They have their exemption for the first, was it 1,600 feet floor space?
Well, both that and also they have some sort of grandfather right. Now, it's possible that something else might trigger in and screw that up in some way, shape, or form, but then that would be the same case regardless of whether it's,
Yeah.
they would, the only way, like, if that were actually a problem, the only way to solve that would be to consolidate the lots.
What is it we need to take into consideration right now, though? Like, what's the relevant part? Like, I get that
Like, I think the question that you were getting at is logistically, is there a reason why you couldn't do some sort of consolidation, whether it's whether it's several buildings in totality or the rear of several buildings, is there a logistical reason why that would be difficult to do? From what I'm looking at here, I think it's kind of 6, 1/2 dozen of the other. If this is really just one parcel of several running buildings, then I don't see what the logistical difference for him would be between this versus recording his property and having a whole nother, like the larger thing. I'm going to assume, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm going to assume that there's some reason why they have not recorded that plan set. And I suspect when we approved that plan set, there was phasing related to that plan set. And I don't know, I'm just shooting from the hip a little bit, so I apologize in advance, but my assumption is that they're probably not recording that because they don't want to lock themselves into some sort of phasing. So if they were going to do some sort of fitness use, I don't know if having required phasing would complicate that in some way, shape, or form versus they would maybe just try to come in and do a change of use. But I say all that to say, I think that's all kind of beside the point for what we're actually talking about here. I think we're like, in either scenario, they could probably consolidate those properties and do a fitness use, whether it's the entire frontage or whether it's the rear portion of the property.
Yeah. Okay.
But if I'm wrong about that, then if there's some sort of complicating factor that I'm not accounting for, then is there some reason why they couldn't do either of those things?
So, under current parcel configuration and building configuration, you could, within a parcel, so again, we have AmFam, separate parcel.
Yeah.
The building next to AmFam, it's the long skinny one. Those are legally separate parcels.
Yes.
They do belong to the same kind of building, so there might be a way where you could consolidate those internally, as long as you provided kind of the right calculations and followed building code. And there's definitely a way that you can do that without having to do a lot consolidation.
Okay.
For the smaller, again, existing buildings that are all one building, that are all one parcel, same thing, you can go in and do a gut renovation, take out all the interior walls, and do a tenant fit out of however many tenant spaces as you want. The land development plan that was approved would have torn down all of those things and built one building under one parcel. And there is what looks like a tentative kind of tenant separation that was proposed that split the spaces into what appears to be 4 tenant spaces.
Yeah.
And then Get Cafe, there would have been that widened kind of pedestrian walkway. So I'm looking at the land development plans right now. In this configuration, you could then theoretically have rear entrances. There are existing rear entrances, but they're not kind of public-facing entrances.
Right.
So from a zoning perspective and a requirement, what I will say is that requiring a 12-foot frontage use requirement creates a lot of challenges when your existing structure, so going back to the existing structure, if we were to leave the existing structures and retrofit them, they're not all very deep. The one is very deep, it's very skinny, it's very deep. Depending on what kind of studio use you have, or not studio use, fitness use that you have, that might work for you, it might not work for you. And if you have a more shallow depth and you have to use 12 feet of that can be really challenging, because what are you going to, if you don't have a retail component to your business, then you're going to have to partner with another business and have 2 businesses in one tenant spot. And again, depending on your configuration, if you end up losing, you said, up to 1/3 of your space for a retail component when your business doesn't operate on retail, when you need that space for, say it's a Pilates studio, or say it's a kickboxing something, you want that space for your apparatus to increase your class size. Larger classes mean more revenue. You might also just need the physical space because the type of activity that you're doing requires you to have that space. So there's concerns about limiting that space, just because if you don't have a retail component, you could potentially be putting a damper on the types of businesses that are able to come in, because they don't because based on the limited space that we have, that might be limiting to what they can actually fit in the unit space. There is possibility to, as you said, kind of aggregate some of this interior space to kind of reconfigure the whole thing. So if you're going to be doing a gut renovation, leaving the building footprints where they are and just doing an interior renovation, there is a way that you can kind of create L-shaped properties or L-shaped tenant spaces within. But then you start to get into this weird thing where if the landlord says, okay, you can have this kind of weird L shape for your property, then that limits what else can go in terms of how you kind of structure it. So, for example, at 650 Montgomery Avenue, they came in and they had, it was all on spec, right? The tenant spaces weren't necessarily pre-sold prior to them getting their land development approval, so they didn't necessarily know how much space they needed to reserve for certain tenants. I mean, they have an idea.
Yeah.
But the tenants came in and said, I'm looking for this, and they said, okay. One of the reasons why we only just got a new tenant in that last space at 650 Montgomery was because all the tenants said, I want this much space and I want this much space, which created then a squeezed in space that wasn't as appealing on the commercial market as
Right.
something that was slightly
Right.
larger. So when you start to get into trying to manage commercial tenant configurations through zoning, this is not necessarily where we should be focusing a lot of our energies, as my recommendation, because then you start to get into a lot of what if scenarios, and that's not really helpful, because we are not the property owner and we're not the tenant and we're not commercial landlords other than Sabine. So
I
it makes
agree
it
with that sentiment, and like we could have other uses in there, right? If we like all wanted to have an adult conversation about what it takes to get the actual activated uses that our comprehensive plan calls for on Haverford Avenue, we could have that conversation. I think like this is coming up in front of us because it's not currently allowed on that street, and I think Planning Commission has flagged a concern that like the same concern that Planning Commission, when I was on there, flagged for Haverford Avenue when 230 Haverford was coming through, was that they didn't want a long, it's less about like having kind of like one space that has depth, and it's more about a concern that someone consolidates a bunch of spaces into one mega space that then dominates the street front with something that's not activated. I think that's the broader kind of concern, and I totally agree. I think you're right. Like,
Yeah.
it's really not our role to try to like micromanage that, but I feel like we've also put Haverford, like, it's like I feel like we've put Haverford Avenue in the back foot, and then something has come along and we go, well, let's just quick make this change. But
Yeah.
if there is a consolidation of like a bunch of storefronts and it turns into one mega space, it will then also probably be much more difficult to recreate those smaller spaces. The smaller spaces have a real benefit to being much more attainable for someone who has some sort of smaller
Yeah.
entity. And I do think that if they get consolidated at some point, it's going to be harder to turn them back into smaller spaces because they're probably substandard to what you would do for a commercial space today.
So I asked a version of that to Jennifer in my conversation with her, and I asked, had a theoretical fitness use that came in, wasn't able to use the first 12 feet because they weren't a retail company. She said, or I asked, is it one possibility that space just remain vacant, while there's no retail operation there? And she said, yeah, that's quite possible.
Yeah.
Or that a second business is able to sublet it somehow. And I was wondering, even in the example, the 650 Montgomery Ave, where you have that final, squeezed space, does that present an opportunity for a business, to get something with a little cheaper rents? If you have a fitness use that's going on, beyond the first 12 feet, and they have this otherwise unusable 12 feet in their front, is that a little added incentive to get a business use that wouldn't normally find, a hospitable
It
storefront?
probably also, it's similar to what the manager was saying a minute ago. It probably depends on any number of factors that's specific to that given owner, and it may be different from one owner versus another. Like someone who wants to, for instance, sell the property might be incentivized to be like, can I find one day tenant and then sell the thing? Versus someone who might want to own it over a longer period of time and has like this will complement that, might have a different like incentive set for the property. So I don't know that there's a way to like account for that at a level of like sophistication.
I just also throwing this out there, you also have the building code requirements. So there's various, sprinkler requirements and I'm gonna forget the name of it. Just your like occupancy requirements based on the type of use. That's more based on construction type, but there's various means of egress. There's other things that would have to be considered again that's not regulated through zoning that would impact that. So the question really is, if you have a 12-foot requirement, as our planning commission has said, there could be a possibility then that the first 12 feet of space that we're trying so hard to activate remains vacant while the rest of the space is utilized. So is that a benefit to you to sit on vacant storefront space while the rest of the space gets used? Or would it be more beneficial to have the whole space be used, and while it might not be used 24/7, you only have classes certain times of the day, the rest of the day you wouldn't necessarily see people working out in there, but you would see inside the business and know that that business is operating. Is that really the more of the important goal that you're looking for?
Well, I think, right, because there's two pieces. It's not just 12 feet. It's also if you've exceeded a certain frontage width, right? So like maybe 20 feet if it's below the thing, maybe if it were something that captured all of these things, you could just do the entire building as that. It's really only if you're like trying to assemble a bunch of things in one mega space that the rule will kick in. Now, maybe right now, what Jim's saying is that 20 feet, you actually couldn't do it on most of these. But if it were something that actually, because I think that's what the Planning Commission discussion was actually about, is my understanding. It wasn't just saying, because their initial recommendation was 12-foot depth, period, right? And they came back and said, well, 12-foot depth only if you're effectively trying to consolidate multiple things.
Or the storefront width is existing beyond 20 feet. I think it's, didn't they say that?
Yeah, so the clause that we would be looking at here would be so fitness studios may be permitted on the ground floor of commercial and mixed-use building on Haverford Avenue and North Narberth Avenue. And then for buildings with a width of 20 foot or greater, and really, this is where, when we say buildings, what we mean is a tenant storefront. The first 12 feet of depth from the front of the building must be occupied by another use that is currently permitted on the ground floor, i.e. retail. So it could be that you have, I don't know, Pure Barre, to use as an example, they've got merchandise. So their first 12 feet could be occupied. Maybe I shouldn't use a specific business. Some fitness business has merchandise, and they sell equipment that's used for their classes. They sell t-shirts, they sell leggings, they sell, tote bags and water bottles and grippy socks and whatever they have. They could then have that full space. But say you have a small mom and pop and they don't have merchandise and they don't have a smoothie bar and they don't do any sort of retail component, but they're in one of the spaces that's greater than 20 feet, now all of a sudden they can't occupy the first 12 feet because they don't have a retail component. So they either come up with a retail component, they say here's like one sad rack of t-shirts that we put our logo on, and it's technically a retail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's what you're gonna get.
No, I understand.
So
What's the largest?
They're not gonna wanna share the space, I'm assuming, with another tenant, because then that creates all sorts of, maybe they do, but it just.
Sure. In that run of buildings, what's the largest width foot-wise?
Is it like 40 something? You're talking about the vacant spaces?
Yeah.
I sort of measured these, I think it's like 43 maybe?
Of the ones on the, like, call it on the other side of the,
On the other, okay, other side of the, I mean, between Swan and Get. All right, so. Well, I'm just looking on the county property map.
So, Get Cafe is about 30. What's next to Get is just over 20. But then, would that have been McShay's?
yeah, McShay's, well, McShay's is one, there's one old phones between Get and McShay's. McShay's is the one with the little brick kind of fronting, and then McShay's also owned the takeaway business next to McShay's.
Okay, so let me see. So it's actually, okay, so what is now Shift? Okay, so Shift is, we'll say 30-ish. Get Cafe is just over 20, and then it would be, so McShay's is less than 20. The taco place that was next to McShay's, that's definitely less than 20. Oh, phone repair and then McShay's. Anyway, pretty much all of the rest of them, everything else is less than 20, we'll say.
I think that's why they chose 20. Jen had indicated that they tried to look at the spaces and create a standard
Okay.
that was basically the width of one of the spaces. Because again, I think my understanding of the logic after because I went into this with a lot of those same questions, was that, yeah, if someone wants to come into one of these spaces, then that should be fine. You can use the entire space. Their concern was someone accumulating multiple of these spaces, knocking out the interior walls, turning them into one mega gym. It was not a concern about a mom and pop kind of coming in and activating one of these. And even under that circumstance, right, you could have multiple small actors coming in, boom, 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 right? The concern was that, does the incentive structure set up a situation where the incentive is to just get one tenant, find a mega space, knock out all of those small spaces that you will probably never get back as small spaces. And then now that space has been set up as one gigantic thing, and then even if that use moves on, this is now what you're left with. I think that was the concern, and you know, like, I think it's unfortunate that we're kind of here in this kind of very reactive posture towards Haverford Avenue, but I do, that concern does, and it's this weird thing because it kind of goes against some of my nature, which is much more what the manager articulated, which is like, set up a rule set and then let people kind of figure it out. But the concern about losing a bunch of those individual spaces does resonate. And then I think that they wrestled with this and came away with something that said, yeah, if someone wants to come in and activate these spaces, they totally can. We just don't want you to come in, accumulate it all for one large fitness use.
Right, right.
And the L-shaped thing was just again, that was, I don't know that that's necessarily like I don't know whether it's likely stock or not. That was there just to say, like, if you really do want to accumulate something, we still want you to keep some of these fronting individual spaces. But again, maybe no one does that. Maybe they just come in and they rent one of the spaces, turn it into a Pilates studio, and then that's totally legal under the planning commission recommendation, unless I'm missing something. And if the dispersion ordinance is completely relieved, then you can do multiple of them. Pilates studio, kickboxing, whatever, right? And that's totally kosher, which it wouldn't be today.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's the right thing or the wrong thing to do, but that was my understanding of the concerns. And I kind of have been turning this around a lot in my head, and that resonates, and also I think raises the additional issue is like, something's got to give on Haverford Avenue. So we should, given that is just kind of like, everyone I think understands at this point that that's in the stasis point, there should be some conversation going
Right.
forward about how to like proactively get what we want there. Conversation for another time, but I think it's hanging over this entire conversation.
Okay, but as far as this recommendation goes,
Yeah.
I think other council people are gonna want to participate in this kind of, back and forth too, because there's some fundamental things here.
Yes.
So, as far as, I think we've talked a lot of it now, but can we move it forward and just let the business meeting take it over?
You can, if you'd like to if there is a consensus in terms of including the 12-foot setback and the dispersion. So, right now, the ordinance itself reads that there shall be, for buildings with a width of 20 feet or greater, not greater than 20 feet, 20 feet or greater.
We could change that to greater than 20 feet if we think that's going to
Is
accidentally.
there something that's really right, exactly 20 feet though?
The only one that appears could be right on the line there is the building that's next to AmFam.
If we want to exempt more properties, just say 22 feet, and
And just, there's a
Yeah.
buffer.
yeah. We could literally count the vacancies and what the measurements are, like we just did, and say, okay, I'm willing to permit fitness uses full way through on X number of these existing properties, and then work backward from there, right? Like, it looks like 20 feet will allow 2, probably, but if we wanted to make it 3, bump it up a little bit, is that unreasonable, or?
I would just want to double check that it conforms to various tenant spacing widths that we have elsewhere in the ordinance. So I'm not sure if we have anything else that would correlate to that 20 feet or greater than 20 feet. Because if we have certain facade requirements that are limited to the 20 feet, then that makes sense to have it as a uniform. If they all say 20 feet or greater, like once you hit 20 feet or greater, or if you have less than 20 feet, these facade requirements apply to you, and then anything above that. I would just want to make sure that this aligns, because then we're going to get into, you apply this facade, but then this use triggers this other requirement. So if it jives, then I would just want to double check that. But right now, what we're saying in the draft ordinance is that there is no dispersion ordinance, so any fitness use can go next to any fitness use, which would actually allow for the same exact fitness use to go side by side. So you could have a Pilates studio next to a Pilates studio.
Yeah.
Seems unlikely though, doesn't it?
It seems unlikely, although, Pilates in particular is very, very hip right now. I know Ardmore just had some Pilates studios open. But yes, market competition would seem to insinuate that that might not be possible, or that might not be likely, but it is possible.
But it could happen.
It could happen.
If that happens, why not? Like, I don't really.
But as it is, in the existing configuration on Haverford Avenue, not many of the buildings actually exceed this 20 feet. So, to that point, the majority of the units would not trigger this 12-foot requirement.
Right.
Those that have larger frontages, this would trigger that requirement. So, to Michael's point, the larger, really it's AmFam. So if that one were to be converted to a fitness use, they would need to have 12 feet along the entire frontage for some sort of retail component. It could be, food and beverage. It could be like, a smoothie and snack bar plus merchandise or whatever,
Yeah.
And then the fitness use behind it. If somebody were to aggregate multiple lots, then that would trigger the same requirement. In current configurations, it wouldn't. In the event that the land development does proceed, the intent behind it was that, what we have 8, different tenant spaces now gets consolidated into 4, is what the original land development plan envisioned. Obviously, the tenant mix isn't set at the time the land development is approved. So there could be then the potential that you do get a larger tenant in the event of a redevelopment, in which case this would still apply at that time. So it's really up to you how you feel about the activated storefront, the use of the space, and keep in mind the zoning isn't specific to current configuration or a redevelopment configuration. This would apply regardless of what happens with the actual physical buildings themselves. This is you setting the stage for whatever uses come in whatever kind of building configuration comes in, because this zoning stays regardless of any sort of demolition or construction activities.
Yep.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I tend to think that, like, unless the world changes, probably the circumstance in which there's a new development is probably a circumstance that is preceded by some sort of zoning ordinance, or else we would see dirt turning on that site. So presumably a use mix would be revisited at that time, if it even gets to that. So for right now, what we're really looking at is the theory that we can try to reutilize some of these spaces, maybe they hit a different price point for the commercial tenants, then that kind of like 20-foot rhythm makes sense to me. I don't think it's perfect, but we're dealing with imperfect problems.
Yep. All right. What do we? How do we conclude this conversation now?
If you are uncomfortable, I'm comfortable recommending the planning commission recommendation. If you're not comfortable with that, we can forward it.
I am, but I also want to just acknowledge that the same conversation we have had here can be had among the larger group of us.
I don't think
Come to a
anyone on
different
council
conclusion.
is going to rubber stamp the F&A recommendation.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that in the past, we've sometimes had moments where we decided to forward things without recommendations. I think that's probably just not good practice. I think if things are getting sent to committee, we should generally give a recommendation, and then council can always do something else.
Yeah.
So if I may suggest, I can either draft a brief summary of the discussion points that were raised, or Jim, if you want to draft something, and then we just circulate that to council.
Okay.
Because if there's no clear direction and you don't feel ready to necessarily make a motion to authorize advertisement of the ordinance as it's written, because there's still questions as to whether or not you want to include certain clauses, then we can just, again, table the motion and then draft a summary of the discussion points to council.
Can we do both? I mean, I don't, like...
You want to make a recommendation and pass along?
What do you think?
You can do that as well, that's fine.
I think, yeah, make a recommendation and pass along the discussion points.
I think that's fine. I mean, we're only voting to recommend that council.
You'd be voting to recommend authorization to advertise the
Yeah,
ordinance.
Yeah,
So we're talking ordinance advertisement at this
Mhm.
point. Planning Commission has reviewed it, has given their feedback.
yeah,
So if you would like to recommend authorizing the advertisement with the following,
yeah.
points of consideration for final,
Mhm.
final language approval prior
Right.
to that it being
Right.
advertised. Because we haven't advertised it yet, so you can make whatever changes to the language you want up until the point you advertise it.
Yeah,
Let's do that.
I think I would recommend advertising the ordinance, and then I would say reflecting the planning commission recommendations.
Yes, yes. Okay. Do you need to motion that?
I think that was my.
That's a motion. I will second that. And we'll vote on that. All in
Yeah.
favor? Okay, we're in favor of that too. Nothing. And we anticipate larger council discussion on
I
this.
think that's probably right.
Okay. Item E, adoption
Move to
2027.
recommend adoption of the CIP for 2027-2031.
Second. All right, CIP.
All right.
That makes sense to me.
So this is substantively the same as what we presented on the last meeting that we met in July. So this is our 2027 to 2031 five-year capital improvement plan, outlining the various projects that we anticipate pursuing within the next five-year timeframe. So as noted in the document and as presented previously, we have a number of items that we're pursuing for implementation for next year and beyond, which are articulated in the five-year CIP. Again, this is all the same as what we had discussed previously, so we haven't made any updates since then. There's a couple of things that were requested, which I attempted to incorporate in here just to kind of clarify a few things. So in the actuals for 2026, some of these are things that we've already spent the money on, or we have at least a final dollar figure. So for some of these, we've also authorized the costs, but we won't actually spend the money until the thing happens, but we have the actual dollar value. The two that are highlighted in blue here are the things that we haven't finished and we don't have a final cost for yet, so those are still the estimated costs that were in our CIP from last year. Looking ahead into 2027 and beyond, anything that's articulated or that's highlighted in green, these are all of the projects that we anticipate seeking grant funding for. And so from a cost perspective, if you look at the bottom sum totals, we have the total estimated cost, which is the flat rate cost for everything. The urgent items includes everything except for the ones that are highlighted in yellow. Those are things that are listed as non-urgent. But because they elevated to a high or medium-high ranking, they were included, but those are also things that we could push off if necessary. And then the total estimated cost with outside funding is what's assuming where we're getting cost reductions through either Lower Merion contributions to the skate park, which is highlighted in purple, and then everything that's highlighted in green assumes a grant fund, and we're assuming for that bottom line item that we're only taking on 50% of those costs. So that's kind of the target number then that we would be looking to spend for the year. So you'll see that some of our line items for the next couple of years are at or just above $1 million in CIP spending per year. With all of the costs that we're hoping to get through various grant sources, that takes it down to between 600 and we'll say 750 for the majority of the years. So if you keep in mind, we had budgeted last year $500,000 into capital. So depending on how our budget starts looking as we proceed, that $500,000 will get us close, not 100%, but still get us close to covering the cost of these anticipated projects if we get the supporting funding that we're hoping and will be seeking.
Yeah.
So that helps us a lot in kind of, I think, framing how we're spending our money and what sort of money we need to set aside for this. Because otherwise, if we don't get funding, then we're looking at double the cost to implement these projects.
Right.
And as a reminder, these are all the ones that kind of marked, high and medium high on our ranking score.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We also have the full master inventory in here. I know a couple people were interested in taking a look at that. We did eliminate a few things, which are the ones that have the strikeouts. They were eliminated in part because they're no longer needed. We identified a different project that more or less encompasses that. Anything that's highlighted in gray are things that have already been completed. Anything that's marked as in progress are the things that we are actively working on, that we've started spending money on, or they're things that we anticipate completing this year. And then otherwise, everything else is listed as proposed. And I realize there's one item in here that's highlighted in purple that just, that should have been eliminated. That purple means nothing.
Where is that?
That one is the library entrance plaza,
What page?
68, 67.
267?
Sorry, just 67.
Page 67?
Page 67.
Are you in F&A or are you?
Oh, I'm back in the business meeting. That's a coincidence because it starts on page 267. Okay.
Oh, that's funny.
Weird. Okay.
Anyway, minor point. And then taking a look at our funding forecasts, I just ran the funding forecast for all of our items. Past years, we separated out between urgent items and non-urgent items. I just did all items. The non-urgent items are fewer than they used to be, so I just kept them in there and just assume that if those do come out, then our numbers go down. But you can see that if we don't do the general fund transfer, we won't even have enough. So we have our operating fund balance, which is the balance that we have at the end of July. Taking out the reimbursement that we're expecting from the bridge, which is the 158 so far. So these are the costs that we incur that we then have to apply for reimbursement.
Yeah.
That's what we are looking at. Again, as of this snapshot in time, that number will continue to fluctuate. Outstanding CIP items, those are all of the ones that are in progress, but we haven't actually expended the money yet. So that money will obviously come out of our operating fund balance. So if we have $607,000 at the end of July, we're anticipating another $427,000 or so for additional expenditures this year. Plus we add in, so the reserve fund balance in Pliget, that $513,000, that's the money that we allocated this year for the capital plan. I took that money and put it right into Pliget. We didn't need to dip into it this year for our operating costs for capital. So that's just sitting in a higher yield interest account.
Okay.
So that's part of it. So we have 600 in our operating, we have 513 in our reserve. We're expecting a 158 bridge reimbursement. Outstanding for the balance of the year is going to be 428, which means that in total at the end of the year, by December 31st, I anticipate that our operating fund balance of our operating and reserves in total will be about 851. So we're going to be starting the new year with about $851,000 in our capital, our combined capital fund account that we can then use to pay for all of our projects next year. However, again, if we take all of the items and don't have any sort of outside funding sources for them, we're looking to spend $988 and we're already in the red.
Yeah.
So if you just scroll down, so then we have a one-time fund transfer of $500,000 next year. And then we have an annual transfer scenario of $500,000. And then we have an annual transfer of $500,000 plus the grant funding. So if we look at that bottom scenario, we can see that we will have a positive operating fund balance, a very healthy operating fund balance through the 5-year CIP if we continue to seed $500,000 each year into our capital and seek outside funding. Because even if we just do the transfer, the annual transfer, we still run out in 2028. So the grant dollars are gonna be the thing that keeps us going. Otherwise, we will need to seek to increase then the annual transfer into our operating capital if we're not able to get the grant funding. This also, keep in mind, the skate park is included in these numbers. So the funding source here for the outside funds assumes a 100% construction cost being paid for by Lower Merion. That is explained in the actual document itself. So I pulled out some of the key things to explain kind of what some of the funding mechanisms might look like for that. So that's we've been looking at the appendix. If you look in the actual CIP report, I added a section this year called Select Project Notes. So we talked about the skate park. So I explained in that section how the funding for the skate park is anticipated to proceed. I talk about the dump truck. Again, this is where we had authorized the funds already, but we're not going to pay for them until next year. The library vestibule, this is one of those projects as well that we authorized for construction this year, and then after evaluating it and discussing with our engineer and the library board, we were going to do the gutters next year. We've decided just to push the whole project off until next year to do them all as one. And then the unexpected cost was the replacement Ford Explorer that we were going to pay for next year, but because of the storm that we had last month, we pushed that up about 6 to 8 months. So just explaining some of those things, but the skate park is the main one for that scenario. So in the event, if we go back into the appendix and our estimated costs for projecting out, the first 3 scenarios still assume that the borough is paying for the costs for the skate park. So the annual transfer, the last scenario, the annual transfer plus the outside funding, the grant funding, is the only one that assumes that money is coming out entirely.
So that essentially counting Lower Merion's contribution as a grant?
Yes.
Grant funding?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. So if we were to, we can't bind future councils to making a $500,000 transfer every year. Right?
Well, but I think what we could do, and I thought about this last year, and I'm glad that you brought this up, is we could ask or set a general policy or expectation.
Yeah, that's where I was going. Right.
Okay, go for it.
Well, no, yeah, that we have a CIP funding policy.
Yeah, and even though we're not binding a future council's hand, we could, for instance, say we would like the first version of the budget to generally include a, urgent items funded expectation for the CIP, and then future councils could always have a discussion as to whether to reduce that, but it would come in with the expectation that we want to see what it would mean to be regularly fully funding this, so that we don't end up in a situation where the inverse happens, right? Where the escalation in costs of operations, the expectation comes in and says, oh, well, do you want to add money into the CIP? And then it's kind of like it's framed a little bit differently, but I think having the first line expectation be like, we are committed to funding our CIP items, and if that means covering the escalation in operating costs through millage or whatever it is, then that's the kind of conversation. Or if future councils want to cut back on some of their CIP for that year, that is their prerogative to do that.
Go for it.
But having that kind of expectation set up front, I thought would be helpful.
Okay.
Is there a reason why there's no inflation in the $500,000 number? Is it just assuming that it's a little, sort of inflation-wise, it's worth a little less each year, or is it just an arbitrary number, or is it?
So the 500,000 is just what we have contributed this year.
Yeah.
And so when we had our budget discussions last year, we talked about this being kind of the norm going forward, is that we would do $500,000. And also the point of the EIT and raising the EIT to the full 1% is that that's generating that revenue then that we can continue investing in our capital program. So in a 5-year time frame, yeah, I was not expecting that I was not accounting for inflation, also because our CIP numbers are based in 2026 dollar values. So for the projects that we anticipate paying for in 2030, we did not apply an inflationary calculation to those costs to anticipate what the cost would be in 2030. We're saying if this project was added to the CIP in 2026, we're putting the cost of that project in 2026 dollars. So what we end up doing then, as we kind of know more data, your first year or two of the CIP is going to be updated to be more reflective of the actual anticipated cost for the project. And we update the cost every single year. So you'll see that the price for these projects will change over the years, but we're not preemptively calculating the cost of inflation or the impacts of inflation on those. So it is static in that sense.
That makes sense.
Do you think it's worthwhile if we were to work on a CIP funding policy?
Yeah, if that's something that you would like to pursue to articulate that. I mean, the CIP, as we've discussed ad nauseum, is a planning document. You know, these things get discussed really in terms of the budget. When we actually put the dollar values in our budget comes at a later point in time. But if you want to create a policy that council adopts that speaks more to how you would like to recommend future councils implement and evaluate and kind of use the CIP as a planning document, as something that helps guide that funding decision-making process, then we can certainly look into a formal policy.
I think it's worthwhile, because that's what the CIP is designed to do, is to have that look ahead and to anticipate large expenses like this. So why not also anticipate funding them? It's kind of like the other shoe, Yeah, I think it's
Makes sense.
worthwhile.
Is there any update on the skate park conversations with Lower Merion?
No, at this point, we have given all of our needs for an MOU to our solicitor who's drafting that agreement to be shared with Lower Merion. So at this point, it's between the attorneys to draft that MOU. So we'll be continuing those conversations and anticipate that formal agreement will be before council and then the township electeds in September for formal adoption. So as soon as we have that ready, we'll share that out, and everyone can take a look at it and ask questions.
And just a side remark about the playground anticipated for improvement in the 27-28. That is something we could get started on the community engagement part, to have a little.
Yeah, so let me share kind of my internal musings. I know that I've shared some of this with council and in public meetings, but certainly happy to discuss it further. So the idea is that the skate park, as we've previously discussed, will have a joint community group steering committee of sorts with Lower Merion and Narberth that will get kickstarted. We'll do visioning exercises and kind of go through that process, applying for grants next year, and then we can potentially start construction next year, again, depending on how we move forward with the MOU and then the intergovernmental agreement. Because Lower Merion is taking on a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to the grant writing, that opens up borough staff to be able to apply for grants for other projects through next year's funding cycle. Some grants you can apply for and receive money in the same year, which we saw through the MONCO 2040 implementation grant. We were able to get the funding authorization award for our Elm Grove Park pedestrian bridge this year, which will be constructed in early spring of next year. We applied for the other half of the funding through DCNR. So again, these are, April or March, April application deadlines, but for the DCNR grant, we won't find out until October or November for that one, which is fine because we're not going to do the construction until the following year. So whenever you apply for grants, you always have to assume that you apply for grants in 1 year with no construction actually happening until the following year, because most grants are set up so that they have a longer lead time. So what we've done in our CIP for the playground specifically is that because we know that we want to phase the skate park construction first before we do the playground, but knowing how important the playground is to everybody and wanting to kind of move on that, we're able to next year devote staff time to writing those grants in the spring, since Laura Marion is going to be working on the grants for the skate park. So these projects might end up being more closely constructed in terms of time of when activities of construction are happening, which is fine. We should be able to phase it, but we need to apply for grants next year so that we can hopefully get then any grant awards secured by the end of 2027 so that we can do construction in 2028. If we don't want to wait for grants, then we can, through the budget process, budget for the construction activities, assuming no grants, and we can do construction in 2027 of the playground. In order to get to the point though where we want to do grants, we'll need to have some sort of actual design in place. Most grants require a shovel-ready project, so you can't say, well, we're going to do a park or a playground. And they say, okay, great, but like what apparatus, where is it going, what's the design, what's the layout, what's the safety rating, who's your vendor? We need to have all of that locked in. So what we're going to do is in the next couple of months, we'll be seeking professional services for the design element of that playground. So we're going to tee ourselves up. So we always start at the end goal and work our way backwards. So if the end goal being grant applications, assuming a March application deadline, we need to have a project package done by February, and we want to make sure that we have time for some public engagement on the park. So we'll have a little bit of a concurrent thing going on where we're going to have the skate park and we're going to have the playground. I'm hoping that it's not going to be too confusing to have kind of two separate elements being configured at the same time. I'm hoping that this is also a really fun project, that people are going to be really engaged and want to provide their feedback and tell us what they hope to get out of a playground kind of renovation project. So we're going to be, like I said, working on getting some professional services together, and then we're going to start doing some community engagement. So once we have our professional services locked down, then we can work with them on the specific timeline, and then we'll be sharing with the community opportunities to get engaged. And the idea is that we'll plan on having maybe like 3 final designs, right? We'll get input from the community, we'll take a look at the master parks plan, we'll take a look at the actual considerations, we'll talk to Public Works, so we'll get input from everybody about how this thing actually gets built, who and how it's maintained. So we get kind of our final 3. I'm thinking we do a big community engagement session where we get people to vote on their top 3, and then democracy rules, and council can override anything, but I've figured
Democracy rules, but not really.
Democracy.
Let's start out the process with maybe like iterative design feedback until we get to that stage. So it's incorporated on the front.
So yes, I can't imagine that we'll get to that point and then all of a sudden there's a pivot. So the idea being that we'll work through this process, we'll see kind of what it is, and we'll continue moving on from there.
Tax?
Yes.
He's downstairs in the office today. Sorry. I'll take it. I'll take it.
School taxes?
Yeah.
Right, so we'll have an engagement process, and it'll, be iterative. We'll kind of see the process. We can have the design consultant give updates, probably to, I don't know if you want it with infrastructure committee.
Me.
I think because Parks and Rec is now reporting to infra, structure. So I think that probably makes sense to be the
Yeah.
report.
Yeah, so we'll work with infrastructure, we'll work with Parks and Rec,
Yeah.
we'll work with our consultant, we'll do outreach, we'll have design plans, we'll go through the whole process with the idea that we'll have kind of final designs by the beginning of the year, and we'll kind of narrow those down. So by the time that we get to writing our grant, we have exactly what we want to build,
Yeah.
ready to go. So plans in our pockets,
It's the end of this year?
beginning of next year.
Maybe end of next year. Okay.
And get so like, and I'm sure this is going to be given to them anyway, but specifically in the appendix to the master parks plan, we have the summarized results of that initial level of like feedback, which granted was much higher level, but it provided kind of like people's values and goals, which I think is a good starting point
Yes.
that they can then build off of with specific kind of like design stuff that then gets iterated through engagement process.
Yeah, and I want to be clear, we're not starting from scratch. We are using
Yeah.
those past planning materials as a spring point for then how we drill down into the specifics.
Yeah,
Because what we have out of the master parks plan is still very conceptual.
yeah.
And we're going to need something very specific.
Yes, totally. No, this is exciting. I
Great.
think that'll be a great process. I think rather than being confusing, I think it would be good if we're able to kind of do both of those projects in succession, especially because they're right adjacent to each other.
Mhm.
That'd be nice.
That's
Super.
It's very exciting.
All right. So can we vote on the adoption of the capital improvement plan?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. All in favor? All against? No one against. 2-0. Okay, last item F.
Move to recommend the zoning hearing board fee waiver request for 316 Marion.
Second. Okay.
How many times do we actually get reasonable accommodation requests that require a zoning variance?
So here in Narberth,
In Narberth?
I've never seen this happen in Narberth. I'm not aware that it's happened in Narberth. I've also never seen it anywhere else.
Okay.
It's more rare to see an FHA reasonable accommodation request coming through. However, the courts have set groundwork to say that the local zoning hearing board is the proper adjudicatory body to hear these cases.
Yeah.
So I want to be clear that this request is not to ask for council to weigh in on
Right.
whether or not the request meets reasonable accommodation, but what's being requested is the fee,
Yeah.
the application fee. So currently we charge $1,500 for an application fee for a zoning hearing board. In speaking with both our general attorney and our zoning hearing board attorney, they've never seen anybody waive an application fee. And that's because the municipality's planning code allows municipalities to set reasonable fees to cover the costs associated with the hearing.
Right.
Certain fees are able to be passed on to the applicant. The municipality does have to pay for other fees themselves. So currently, our intern did a great job analyzing all of the zoning hearing board fees back from 2020, and we've collected $1,500 for most of that time, and we've spent about $3,000 on just about every single application.
Sure.
So the attorney's fees are not things that we can pass on to the applicant, but things like the actual admin time, the legal advertising, so we have to post in the paper, we post the physical property, the cost to mail the adjoining letters, and all of the clerical costs that go along with that. I will say our ordinance is drafted in such a way that it requires the applicant send out the adjoining letters, but because applicants are confused by that requirement, it's easier if the admin takes it on. So there's additional costs that we do incur that our zoning hearing board would otherwise require the applicant to incur, but we just account for that as part of
Sure.
the fees, right?
Yeah.
So by waiving this application fee, then we would not be recuperating any costs for any staff time, materials, postage, legal advertising that we would otherwise collect as part of a normal zoning hearing board application.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, like the fees are there to recoup those costs. I do think that this is like, reasonable accommodation is like a weird use case, right? Because like the theory behind it is that you're requesting a thing in order to actualize a federally provided right. And kind of what we've said now is like, in order to actually get access to your right, you have to cover all this process cost for us. Which maybe like if it were like someone who was doing a complete new construction developer, like that's not like a huge cost. But I feel like in these weird edge cases of like reasonable accommodations, like the point of it, right, is that you have some sort of protected class of person that is actualizing that right. In this case, someone who has a medical need, like a physical disability of some sort. We don't see this that often, but it's like a weird thing to be like, well, okay, because like, right, like this is the catch-22 of this sort of thing in this case, right, is that like, if I'm at my age, I don't have a bathroom on my ground floor, but if I wanted to retrofit my house to provide accessibility for the future at a point in time where I am like financially able to do so, I wouldn't be able to do that because of the side setbacks, and then I also wouldn't be able to actualize that until the point in time where I have a physical impairment, which would probably make the cost to realize my federal right like suddenly higher for me. So this weird catch-22, I think the ultimate solution is just to kind of like liberalize some of your side setbacks so that people don't get funneled into this unnecessarily, and then you have, it's already a small use case, we don't really see these that often. But I mentioned all of that to say like, if we were seeing tons of reasonable accommodations for this sort of thing, then maybe I would feel differently, but like, this is a family that's trying to actualize the federal right to accommodate to local zoning so that they can put in what is in actuality a very small project, and it doesn't seem like they have, I mean, if one of the individuals in the household is suffering from an onset of dementia, then they certainly don't have two-income household unless they have like someone living with them or something to that effect. It just feels like a very like specified use case that I understand would cause us to eat that cost. But for those reasons, I think I'm comfortable with that, and in this use case, and I think it flags this other thing that why did they need to jump through all these rules in the first place? I know why they did, but like, is that something that we should revisit as well, just to make it easier for everyone else to be able to do really small scale addition things like this?
Yeah, but I think the answer to that is not waiving everyone's fee. It's having some kind of run around the need for ZHB approval for projects.
It is, but right now we have this in front of us right now, and again, we don't regularly have reasonable accommodation to zoning requests. And if we had a different one, right, like if we had a reasonable accommodation to zoning request that was coming, because like the major use case you see for reasonable, or I don't know, maybe other people have different things. And the major use case I feel like I've seen for reasonable accommodations is related to like group homes, which is a use-based thing and is not an individual like it's not like this type of a thing. But in this case, we have an individual household that has a physical impairment that is trying to do a fairly basic thing to provide a bathroom on a ground floor, presumably because there's mobility issues getting up and down stairs. Do I want to, like, do I think it is reasonable to allow them to achieve their federally protected rights without kind of imposing this cost.
What is their right really? I mean, they're undertaking a construction project, right? And
Right.
they're not going to get that for free, right? They're going to have some kind of outlay for.
Right, but they've also requested waiving the cost to do I think the more extensive survey, which was something else I saw in there, it looked like.
Yes, so in the actual then written request submitted by the applicant, they also were seeking to waive the requirement to do an engineered survey of the property, which is actually the more expensive of the application requirements. And this is not subject to council's ability to waive because that requirement just comes from the zoning hearing board themselves. So the purpose behind that is when you're dealing with variances and you're dealing with dimensional variances, it behooves the applicant to actually know where their property boundaries are to ensure that they're requesting the relief necessary for whatever encroachments they are seeking. So I've had instances, for example, where so our zoning hearing board here requires engineered site plans for that accuracy. This is a choice by the zoning hearing board to require that as part of the application. Other zoning hearing boards don't require engineered site plans and just say, it's on you to be accurate. So if you give us a hand drawing and it's not to scale, but it has accurate measurements and you know where your property boundary is, then that's fine. Where it comes to bite you is when you do that, and I've seen this happen, where somebody says, I know where my property boundary is, I only need relief. So say the setback is a 10-foot setback.
Sure.
They're encroaching 2 feet, so they say, I need to come out to 8 feet instead of 10 feet, it's a 2-foot setback. They go through the zoning hearing board process, they get the relief that they need, and then come to find out, the neighbor disputes the setback, gets a boundary survey done, and it turns out that they actually are encroaching 5 feet. So they're 5 feet away from the setback line, not 8 feet, and now they have to go back before the zoning hearing board to get the additional relief needed for that additional 3 feet that they didn't get the first time because they didn't do their due diligence. So the engineered site plan is a due diligence requirement as part of the application submission package that our zoning hearing board requires to ensure accuracy for these things, to ensure that they're requesting the relief needed.
How are they even submitting an application then if they're requesting a waiver from the application requirements?
They haven't actually submitted an application.
Yeah, they do have a letter of support, or at least non-objection from the neighbor who abuts the property. And my understanding is their proposal is specifically to fill in an architectural feature, I think, that's currently exposed and not interior space, I think.
It appears that they're just extending the line of the existing house.
Okay.
I believe.
Yeah.
But again, based on the setback requirements, maybe it's a rear setback.
Yeah. And it's also it's a weird case as well because we're calling it a variance, it is a variance, but the threshold is not a variance threshold. It's a reasonable accommodation threshold.
So this is where this is a totally reasonable and legal thing to do. So instead of requesting a variance and you have to prove a hardship, the applicant is seeking relief under reasonable accommodation. So rather than proving a hardship, which says that the government is placing burdens on me that are restricting the use of my property, it flips the conversation so that the applicant has to say, my right to reasonable accommodation under this federal statute will not unreasonably impinge upon the government's right to regulate my property for these reasons that I will articulate. So they then come to us and say, I want to do this meets my FHA, but I'm not infringing more upon the government's regulations than I need to meet to satisfy my FHA requirements.
Yes, and it's there to effectuate the fact that you have certain rights under federal law, and the federal government realized at a certain point that there's a million ways municipalities could seek to subvert those rights, And so the solution to that was to basically say, you have a right to a reasonable accommodation. If the local government comes in and creates some sort of regulatory structure that subverts your ability to access your rights, you have a right to a reasonable accommodation, and the intent is to kind of cut through that.
Yeah, I guess where I'm not completely comfortable with the possibility of approving this is that they're asking us to essentially make a predetermination on whether this person is entitled to.
I don't think that's what we're doing at all. The ZHB is the one that certainly I guess like in other variance cases we can submit a position one way or the other. I don't think we would be doing that. I think we would just be saying, because I guess what's the even worst case scenario for if you're just like them, right? Is you request this, if all of the other issues, one person has dementia, physical impairment, blah 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 blah. You pay several $1,000s, then you get rejected, and you've spent that on nothing.
Which is the case for zoning hearing board for anybody.
True, but most cases are not, you don't have a federal right to a variance.
But then what is the barrier then? It's not that we charge them a fee, it's that zoning hearing board denied them their application.
Right, so the thing is in that case, ironically, it's oh, well then what, you have a recourse, right? You challenge that into the court system, okay? But now you have to hire a lawyer. Step, and at the base of it is someone being well, I have a right to a reasonable accommodation for X.
Do you think our fee is are we out of line for other municipalities?
No, and in fact, like I said, our fee doesn't even cover, even if we exclude the legal fees that we can't charge them, we're still not capturing the full administrative costs of holding hearings.
Right.
Yeah, and the core, right, none of this gets at this is just kind of like a Band-Aid for one use case, but the core problem is that you would need the reasonable accommodation, you would need the variance if the side setbacks were not 7 feet, whatever,
Sure, right, that's right.
Because you could construct an accessory building within 3 feet of the lot line, but because this is part of their primary structure, it now suddenly needs to be, right?
I get it, I understand. But it doesn't seem like it's a thing to waive the fee, according to our council and to the ZHB council, that it's not generally done.
Correct.
Can we find another example of a municipality waiving a fee under these circumstances?
I was familiar with that elsewhere, but not, I don't know, Pennsylvania, what?
So our zoning hearing board solicitor is Mike Crotty, and he's a premier land use law expert in the state of Pennsylvania and has adjudicated, I don't even know how many hundreds of zoning hearing board cases over his career, and he said he's never seen anybody waive a fee.
I'd be more comfortable with relying on the legal advice on this, I think.
Well, their legal advice was that we could do it if we wanted to, right?
But that it's not, but
they haven't really seen it as a thing. But again, how often are we seeing reasonable accommodations to zoning?
So from the attorney, he just said, I have not before seen the FHA being cited as a basis for relief from the application fee. So to caveat, I can't tell based on his statement if he's ever seen the governing body waive an application fee for any reason, but he has not seen the FHA being cited as a reason, and the applicant is requesting the waiver from the fee under the FHA specifically for the undue economic or the financial burden that the FHA protects against. But Mr. Crotty is saying that he has not seen the FHA and the reasonable accommodation clause of the FHA used as the basis for relief from the application fee.
Okay. If the question is whether he's seen it at all, it would be good to know whether he's seen it for any other reason either as well.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. It seems to me that since this has not been adjudicated by the ZHB, by the zoning hearing board, yet we don't have a determination whether this really is part of his relief under the reasonable accommodation.
Well, I think as far as, I understand that is their argument. There may be something to that argument, but I think all we would be saying in this case is you can proceed to like, I don't know that we would be necessarily ceding that their rationale, like, we have the ability to do the fee waiver regardless of whether we agree with the rationale under which they've requested the fee waiver or not.
Are we being asked here to approve of the fee waiver
Yes,
or to recommend approval?
to recommend approval.
But it sounds like you're not ready to recommend approval.
I don't think so.
So
It
we
feels
can,
like a-
so
feels like
why don't
we're-
why don't you instead motion to forward without recommendation?
Okay, all right,
I will second that.
okay. All in favor of forwarding without a recommendation? Okay, that's
Do that.
Seem good?
That's fine.
Okay. Great, all right. Hey, that concludes our consideration items. Okay, discussion of facility rentals.
Considering that we're now an hour and 6 minutes over our
That's
regularly
amazing.
scheduled.
Hour 3.
I would support if the committee would like to table that discussion.
Move table.
Yeah.
Or do we need
You
to
don't
take
need
motions or we
one.
just table?
Just-
Did table.
We'll just blow by it.
It's discussion, so we can just skip it.
Committee reports, planning commission, they're not here, we already talked about their business. Ongoing projects, there are none. Public comments, I don't see anyone online nor in the room. Adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
I second the motion to adjourn, all in favor of adjourning. That is 2-0, adjourned at 1:07 PM.